kind of all assumed that we could pivot away from the Middle East and it would be fine. And well, what we saw on October 7th is not fine. It's not fine. Now, of course, the Israelis took their eye off the ball more than anyone else. And in that, I particularly focus on the person of Netanyahu, who should not be running that country. And 86% of Israelis blame him for these attacks. Because if one thing that you have to say is if you're going to bottle up the Palestinians, if you're going to ignore them, if you're going to steal their land, in the case of the illegal settlements they kept building, if you're going to basically run the place into the ground, then you better focus on your border security. You better focus on intelligence. You do not suddenly say, I'm going to focus on my corruption cases and it's all judicial reform, and I don't need to care about that anymore. And Netanyahu he was asleep at the switch. He's accountable, he's responsible, and he should pay the price for that. And the other thing that kind of amuses me in all of this, and I give Biden credit for this, by the way, is Biden has now had these two massive foreign policy crises on his watch. Trump had none. Biden's had two. And in both cases, Biden has needed to work in a very public and strong way to show clear, unabiding support for two leaders that he really personally dislikes and mistrusts: Zelensky in Ukraine and Netanyahu in Israel. And in both cases, he's done it well. He's done that well. I would have a harder time doing that than Biden has had. And look, I mean, he's been around the block a long time. He's old. We all know we think he's too old. But this is something he's actually been good at.
So from a de-escalation perspective, or I guess from a strategical perspective in the U.S., Biden is doing what we would like him to be doing.
Biden, in terms of showing that Israel is the most important ally of the United States at this time, the decision to send two aircraft carrier strike groups to the Eastern Med, send Tony Blinken on a 15 stop and counting shuttle diplomacy across the region, and then Biden going to Israel and wanting to also go to Jordan and meet with those sets of leaders. That's, in my view, those are exactly the right things to do. His pushing of the Israelis on the humanitarian support, I think, could have been earlier and a little more public, especially in terms of the initial siege that the Israelis illegally placed on all of Gaza. I would have been more public about that. I already told you that I would have been pressing the Egyptians a lot harder than they have done in the first couple of weeks. Biden also misspoke when he was asked about the hospital bombings, when he said it looks like it was the other team. And that's a little bit of the quiet part out loud. Now, look, I mean, nobody wants to be on Team Hamas. That's a team of terrorists. But when he says other team, you can see how many people, including in the region, would say, oh, you're on Team Israel and the other team are the Palestinians. And that is not a position that the American president should be in. So I thought that was a mistake, but I guess I probably give him a B+, A- so far. But I'm doing that within the context of a crisis where American influence so far is at the margins. That can change. Hopefully it will. But so far, what we are seeing is a path to escalation.
Yeah, I might give him a lower grade than that, if only because of the, one of the optics that came out of the meeting in Israel was a literal embrace of Netanyahu, a hug.
Yeah, I don't see how you don't do that with the leader of America's top ally in the region.
I agree it's hard not to, but then that raises the whole question of the trip that was initially planned would have had the Sisi, Jordan, it would have been an Arab summit as well, and that would have been great. I mean, the meaning that would have been exactly what you would have wanted, and it's true. But when they pull out, it was probably a no-win situation.
Yeah, I think it was a no-win situation. I think you have to still make the trip, but it's a no-win situation. I guess I just don't blame Biden for the fact that the timing blew up in his face. It's this attack on this hospital was I mean, unspeakable, irrespective of who is eventually found to be behind it, and the disinformation amount. And by the way, the most important blame for this, in terms of the coverage and the response, is the American media. The New York Times ran on its front page, top cover, that this was an Israeli bomb.
That killed
And they
500
got that
people,
information right, from Hamas. What the hell is that? Yeah. And so then you see Reuters and AP and everybody else running with that story. And so then the Saudis and the Jordanians and the Egyptians are running with that story. And it's easy. New York Times then changed their headline. No consequences for them. But now you've got leaders from the region that have already blamed Israel. And the bar for them to change is actually a lot higher, a lot more consequential. And this is just, it is unacceptable. And you probably saw, I went hard after Rashida Tlaib, who immediately blamed Israel. She's a representative of the U.S. government. And in the absence of any fact or evidence, she decides she's going to blame the side she doesn't like. You do that writ large, that's the end of democracy. Just does not work. And look, I mean, this is the one conflict that we've had that I've gotten a whole bunch of death threats. So I get it. Like, there are people out there that are really angry, that, you know, are like serious pro-Israel, serious pro-Palestine. And the fact that I am actually, you know, raising more questions than I'm answering is not acceptable to those people. I get it.
And look, even in the hospital bombing, the one thing that may be most likely in this is also the least palatable from a emotionally heated perspective, which is anyone who's followed this conflict for a while knows that a significant number, not a majority, but a substantial percentage of missiles that either Islamic Jihad or Hamas has tend to go awry.
They fail. Yeah.
Meaning the alternative is not that this was purposely done by Hamas or Jihad. It's that it was a complete cock up.
Right.
Which doesn't play well in a heated moment. Like, oh my God, we literally blew it. And I think that this is just not, you know, an easy part of the mix in these heated moments. And so, you know, you mentioned the Ukraine dropping off the radar.
Let's hold on to this for a second, Zach, because I think people need to understand that there's a bank shot on both of these narratives, right? I mean, look, lots and lots of Palestinians are going to die, Palestinian civilians, and they're going to die because Israel is engaged in a military campaign in Gaza. That is the reality. But then there's the second order reality that we need to understand, which is that Hamas is taking assertive actions to put those civilians at risk through bombs that don't work, but they'll set them off anyway, through misinformation on, you know, sort of campaigns on they're about to bomb, no, they're not, you stay where you are, on putting your military equipment and your leadership right where the civilians are. So, I mean, you cannot say that the Israelis are bombing the Palestinians and they're the ones that are wholly responsible. You have to hold Hamas complicit. Then you have the other bank shot, which is Hamas engages in terrorist attacks against Israel, which is completely unacceptable, and they must be condemned. And that's absolutely right. But the reality is that Israel has refused to deal with the situation of basic human rights for Palestinians, especially in Gaza, for decades now. They've been ignoring it. And that's led to greater radicalization. And it's not like the Palestinians have the weapons that would allow them to fight against the IDF. They don't. So yes, the Hamas targets civilians, but the alternative to targeting civilians is surrender. And so there's a bank shot there. And so, I mean, like when you're involved in both of these second order meta conversations about Israel, nobody wants to have those conversations. We want a hero and we want a villain. And it's very easy for me to say Hamas is the villain because terrorists are villains. And I think Hamas should be destroyed. I believe that. I want them gone the same way I wanted Al-Qaeda gone. But that's not the whole story. It's not even close to the whole story. It might not even be 10% of the whole story. The whole story